"I didn't cheat," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as the classroom fell silent. When Mr. Wilson forced Melania to solve an impossible equation in front of everyone, he thought he was exposing a fraud. But what happens when the quiet black girl from the back row, the one everyone overlooked, turns out to be a mathematical genius beyond anything her arrogant teacher could imagine? Sometimes the people who try to limit us become the catalysts for our greatest achievements. Will Melania hide her brilliance to stay safe, or will she finally let the world see who she truly is? Subscribe now to witness this powerful story of hidden talent, prejudice, and the courage to shine even when others try to dim your light. Melania Johnson slipped into the classroom like a shadow, her eyes downcast as she made her way to the back row. The classroom buzzed with morning chatter, but none of it was directed at her. At 15, she had perfected the art of invisibility, a skill born of necessity rather than choice. "Hey," whispered Jasmine, the only person who seemed to notice her existence. "You okay today?" Melania nodded slightly, managing a small smile. "Same as always." Mr. Wilson entered the room, his half-bald head gleaming under the fluorescent lights, the remaining gray-white hair neatly combed over. The classroom fell silent immediately. His reputation preceded him, the tyrant of the mathematics department. "Take your seats," he announced, placing his leather briefcase on the desk with a deliberate thud. Melania remained standing, leaning slightly against the wall beside her desk. The familiar dread washed over her as Mr. Wilson's gaze swept the room and landed on her. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice dripping with annoyance. "I believe I said take your seats." "I have a note, sir," Melania replied quietly, holding up the crumpled permission slip from the school nurse. "For my back." Mr. Wilson's eyes narrowed, but he didn't press the issue. The permission slip was legitimate, though he clearly considered it an unnecessary accommodation. He turned to the whiteboard, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. As the lecture on quadratic equations began, Melania opened her worn notebook. But while Mr. Wilson explained basic concepts to the class, her pen moved across the paper in elegant, flowing script, differential equations, calculus problems far beyond high school level. Numbers and symbols danced across her page, forming patterns that only she could see. Mathematics had always been her sanctuary. When the world became too loud, too harsh, or too judgmental, numbers remained constant, reliable. They didn't care about the color of her skin or the second-hand clothes she wore. They didn't mock her quiet voice or call her simple because she didn't volunteer answers. The truth was, Melania understood everything Mr. Wilson taught before he even opened his mouth. She could solve his challenging problems in seconds, visualizing solutions as clearly as other people saw colors. But years of experience had taught her that standing out was dangerous, especially when you were already different in ways you couldn't hide. "Can anyone solve this equation?" Mr. Wilson asked, writing a problem on the board. Hands shot up around the room, the usual suspects, students from wealthy families who had private tutors and parents with college degrees. Melania knew the answer immediately but kept her hand down and her eyes on her notebook. In the margins of her page, she had already solved the equation 3 different ways, each more elegant than the approach Mr. Wilson eventually demonstrated. "This is why attention in class matters," he said pointedly, glancing toward the back where Melania stood. "Some of you might find yourselves lost if you're not following along." A few students snickered, assuming his comment was directed at the quiet girl who never participated. Little did they know that while they struggled with one equation, she had filled 2 pages with solutions to problems they wouldn't see until college, if they ever did. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. As students filed out, Melania carefully closed her notebook, her private world of mathematical wonders, and slipped it into her backpack. Another day of invisibility successfully completed. Richard Wilson had been teaching mathematics at Westridge High School for 23 years, and in that time, he had developed what he considered an infallible system for identifying students' potential. The front row belonged to the promising ones, those who raised their hands first, whose parents attended every conference, whose futures included prestigious universities. The middle rows were for the average students who might succeed with proper discipline. And the back row? That was for the lost causes, students who, in his estimation, were simply counting days until graduation would release them from educational purgatory. He adjusted his tie, smoothing it against his slightly protruding stomach as he reviewed the day's lesson plan. His classroom was his kingdom, and within these walls, his word was law. Students feared him, parents respected him, and administrators left him alone due to his students' consistently adequate test scores. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," chirped Cynthia Reynolds, daughter of the school board president, as she took her appointed seat in the front row. "Good morning, Cynthia," he replied with a rare smile. "Ready for today's challenge?" Students like Cynthia made teaching worthwhile. They validated his methods, his expertise, his very existence as an educator. The others, especially those who showed no aptitude for his subject, were merely obstacles to navigate around. As the classroom filled, his eyes narrowed at the sight of Melania Johnson slinking in. There was something about the girl that irritated him profoundly. Perhaps it was her perpetual silence or the way she refused to sit properly at her desk like everyone else. The school nurse's note about her back condition seemed suspicious at best. In his day, students didn't get special accommodations for every little discomfort. More troubling was her complete lack of engagement. No questions, no answers, no visible struggle with the material, just that blank expression and that notebook she was always scribbling in. Probably doodling while he imparted valuable knowledge, he thought bitterly. Mr. Wilson began the lesson with a pop quiz, taking satisfaction in the collective groan that rippled through the classroom. "This will count for 10% of your grade this quarter," he announced, ignoring the looks of panic. "You should be prepared at all times." As he distributed the papers, he deliberately placed Melania's quiz on her desk with enough force to make her flinch slightly. "I expect you to sit for the duration of the test, Ms. Johnson," he said loudly enough for the entire class to hear. "Your mysterious condition doesn't exempt you from proper test-taking protocol." A flush crept up Melania's neck as whispers and snickers surrounded her. She nodded silently and lowered herself gingerly into the chair, her face tight with discomfort. Mr. Wilson watched her with satisfaction before returning to his desk. Discipline was essential for these kids. The real world wouldn't coddle them the way the modern educational system seemed determined to do. As students bent over their quizzes, Mr. Wilson observed the familiar patterns. Cynthia and her front row companions worked confidently. The middle rows showed varying degrees of concentration and anxiety. The back row displayed the expected confusion and resignation, except for Melania, who was moving through the questions with unexpected speed. When she finished well before anyone else, his suspicion flared. Either she had given up and randomly selected answers, or she was cheating somehow. Both possibilities rankled him. He approached silently and stood beside her desk, casting a shadow over her completed quiz. "Finished already, Ms. Johnson?" he asked with exaggerated surprise. "Quality over speed is generally preferred in mathematics." She nodded without meeting his eyes, her hands folded in her lap. He picked up her paper, intending to make an example of her haste. Later, alone in his office, Mr. Wilson graded the quizzes with his red pen poised for action. He enjoyed marking incorrect answers, each red slash a reminder of his superior knowledge. When he reached Melania's quiz, he prepared for the satisfaction of covering it in corrections. Instead, his frown deepened with each perfect answer. Not just correct, but efficiently executed with minimal calculation marks. By the final problem, the most challenging one he had deliberately included to humble the overconfident students, his hand was shaking slightly. She had solved it correctly. And worse, she had used a method he hadn't taught the class. This had to be a fluke. Or cheating. It certainly couldn't be talent, not from the silent, strange girl who couldn't even sit properly in a chair. Mr. Wilson placed her quiz aside, his good mood thoroughly spoiled. Something would have to be done about Melania Johnson. The morning dawned gray and cold, matching Melania's mood perfectly. She'd barely slept, the pain in her back flaring worse than usual. 3 years ago, a previous teacher had shoved her forcefully into a desk when she'd failed to respond quickly enough to a question. The resulting injury never quite healed properly, leaving her with chronic pain that the school system acknowledged but did little to accommodate. "You should stay home today," her mother said, watching Melania wince as she packed her backpack. "I can call the school." "I'm fine, Mom," Melania insisted. "You can't afford to miss another day of work to care for me. Besides, we have a test in history, and Mrs. Carter won't let me make it up without a doctor's note." Her mother's face tightened with familiar frustration, the expression of a parent who wanted to fight every battle for her child but was constrained by the realities of being a single mother working 2 jobs. "At least take your medication today." Melania nodded, though she hated how the pills clouded her mind, making the beautiful clarity of numbers fuzzy around the edges. But today might be bad enough to warrant the trade-off. By third period, Mr. Wilson's class, the medication was wearing off, and Melania could feel sweat beading on her forehead as she struggled to remain upright against the wall. Jasmine shot her concerned glances, but Melania shook her head slightly. Drawing attention would only make things worse. Mr. Wilson entered, slamming the door behind him with unnecessary force. His mood was clearly foul, his complexion ruddy with suppressed anger. "Pop quizzes have been graded," he announced, lifting a stack of papers. "Some of you performed adequately. Others demonstrated exactly why American students lag behind the rest of the developed world in mathematics." He began distributing the papers, offering cutting commentary with each return. "Mr. Peterson, perhaps less time on your phone and more time studying would result in something higher than a D-. Ms. Alvarez, careless errors cost you 10 points. Precision matters in mathematics." When he reached Melania, he paused, holding her quiz just out of reach. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Would you care to explain how you achieved a perfect score when you never participate in class discussions?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward Melania, who wished desperately for her power of invisibility to become literal rather than figurative. I understood the material, sir," she whispered. "Understood the material," he repeated mockingly. "Yet you use methods I haven't taught. Curious, isn't it?" Melania's heart pounded. She had been careless, solving the problems her way instead of following the more cumbersome methods Mr. Wilson had demonstrated in class. "I read ahead sometimes," she offered weakly. "Read ahead," he scoffed. "In what, university-level calculus textbooks? This method isn't covered until at least the second year of college mathematics." A few students exchanged confused glances. Cynthia Reynolds raised her hand. "Mr. Wilson, what did she do wrong if she got the right answer?" Mr. Wilson's jaw tightened. "The issue, Ms. Reynolds, is not the answer but the means of arriving at it. Following instructions is as important as finding solutions." He turned back to Melania. "I believe you've been dishonest, Ms. Johnson. I don't know how you cheated, but—" "I didn't cheat," Melania interrupted, immediately regretting breaking her silence. Her voice sounded strange even to her own ears, too loud, too defiant. Mr. Wilson's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. "Excuse me?" "I said I didn't cheat," she repeated, softer now but still audible. "I just solved the problems." The tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Wilson's face darkened several shades, the vein in his forehead becoming prominently visible. "Well then, Ms. Johnson, since you're apparently a mathematical prodigy hiding in my classroom, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your amazing abilities at the board? Right now." Before she could respond, a sharp pain shot through Melania's lower back, causing her to gasp audibly. She reached for the wall to steady herself. I can't right now, sir. My back." "Yes, your mysterious back problem," Mr. Wilson interrupted, making air quotes with his fingers. "How convenient that it acts up whenever participation is required." "It's not convenient," Melania said, her voice strained. "It hurts." "Sir," Jasmine interjected, "she really does have a medical condition." The nurse. Silence. Mr. Wilson bellowed, slamming his hand on the desk. "I'm tired of excuses and special accommodations for students who simply refuse to participate properly." He marched to Melania's desk and thrust the quiz in her face. A perfect score demands perfect performance. Either prove you earned this grade by demonstrating your work at the board, or admit you cheated and accept the consequences. Tears welled in Melania's eyes as the pain intensified. The entire class was staring, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. The room started to spin slightly. "I can't," she whispered. "Can't or won't?" Mr. Wilson demanded. "Which is it? Are you incapable or merely unwilling? Please." Melania's voice cracked. "Take your seat properly and solve the problem on the board, or I'll have no choice but to report this obvious academic dishonesty to Principal Davis." "I told you I can't sit," Melania finally shouted, tears streaming down her face. The outburst shocked everyone, including herself. In 3 years at Westridge, no one had ever heard Melania Johnson raise her voice. In the stunned silence that followed, she gathered her belongings with shaking hands. "I'll go to the nurse," she muttered, moving toward the door. "If you leave this classroom, Ms. Johnson, don't bother coming back," Mr. Wilson threatened, his authority challenged in front of the entire class. Melania paused at the door, her back to the room. Then, without another word, she walked out, closing the door quietly behind her. Mr. Wilson stood rigid with rage, his breathing heavy and irregular. After a moment, he turned to the class. "Let that be a lesson," he said, his voice unnaturally controlled. "In this classroom, we follow rules and procedures. No exceptions." But the students weren't looking at him anymore. Their eyes were fixed on Melania's abandoned quiz on the floor, a perfect score achieved in half the allotted time, with work so elegant and advanced that their teacher couldn't recognize it for what it was, genius. Mr. Wilson sat alone in his classroom after the final bell, staring at Melania Johnson's quiz. Her perfect score mocked him from the paper, the elegant solutions a personal affront to his authority. In 23 years of teaching, he had never encountered such a situation. A student he had dismissed as unremarkable somehow possessing mathematical knowledge beyond her years. If she had been one of his favored front-row students, he might have celebrated this discovery, perhaps even mentored her. But Melania represented everything that irritated him about modern education, the accommodations, the excuses, the undermining of traditional classroom hierarchy. His phone buzzed with a text from Principal Davis, "Need to discuss incident with Johnson girl tomorrow morning." Parent called. The message only fueled his indignation. Of course her parents would complain. Nobody took responsibility anymore. Everyone wanted special treatment. Mr. Wilson pulled out Melania's permanent record from the file he had requested from the office. Nothing in her previous academic history suggested exceptional ability. Average grades in elementary school, slightly above average in middle school, and mostly BS at Westridge, except for a consistent A in his own class, which he now viewed with suspicion. The back problem was documented, an incident with a teacher at her previous school that was described in frustratingly vague terms. But Mr. Wilson had seen enough students fake or exaggerate conditions to get out of class participation to remain skeptical. As he closed the file, a thought occurred to him, a way to reassert control while exposing what he assumed must be an elaborate cheating scheme. Tomorrow, he would present Melania with a true challenge, something no high school student could possibly solve without outside help. He spent the next 2 hours crafting the perfect problem, a complex differential equation that he had encountered during his graduate studies. Even then, with his bachelor's degree already in hand, he had struggled with it. A 15-year-old genius would find it impossible. The next morning, Mr. Wilson arrived early, the equation already written on the board and covered by a pull-down map. Principal Davis had rescheduled their meeting for the afternoon, giving him the perfect opportunity to expose Melania's deception before administrative interference. As students filed in, he noticed Melania slip through the door, head down as usual but with a new tension in her shoulders. She had returned despite his warning. Even better, now his plan could proceed. "Good morning, class," he announced with unusual cheerfulness. "Today, we have a special opportunity for learning." The students exchanged wary glances. Mr. Wilson's good moods were often more concerning than his anger. Yesterday, we had some discussion about different approaches to mathematical problem solving, he continued, deliberately avoiding looking at Melania. Today, I thought we might explore advanced mathematics as a preview of what awaits those of you who continue your studies at the university level. He pulled down the map to reveal the complex equation. Several students gasped at the intimidating arrangement of symbols and numbers. This, he announced proudly, is a differential equation used in advanced physics and engineering applications. Typically, students wouldn't encounter this until their second or third year of university-level mathematics. He paused for effect, surveying the confused and intimidated faces before him. Now for the coup de grace. However, since we have such advanced mathematical talent in our midst, I thought we might give someone the opportunity to demonstrate their exceptional abilities. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as students realized where this was heading. Ms. Johnson, he said, finally turning to face her. Since you found yesterday's quiz so elementary that you could solve it using graduate-level approaches, perhaps you'd care to try your hand at this? Melania stood frozen against the wall, her face a mask of barely contained panic. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the public humiliation too obvious to ignore. Sir, Jasmine began, that's not fair. Life rarely is, Ms. Williams, Mr. Wilson interrupted smoothly. But true talent rises to any challenge. Isn't that right, Ms. Johnson? Melania's eyes darted from the equation to Mr. Wilson's smug face, then to her classmates' uncomfortable expressions. I don't. Of course, if you'd prefer to admit that yesterday's performance was an anomaly, or perhaps achieved through less than honest means, we can forget the whole thing, Mr. Wilson offered with false generosity. A simple admission of academic dishonesty, a failing grade on the quiz, and we move on. The trap was set perfectly. Either Melania would admit to cheating, or she would fail publicly when confronted with a truly advanced problem. Either way, order would be restored to his classroom hierarchy. That's not appropriate, Mr. Wilson, called a voice from the doorway. Mrs. Carter, the history teacher from across the hall, stood with her arms crossed. I heard raised voices yesterday and again today. Mr. Wilson's smile tightened. This is a private classroom matter, Victoria. Singling out a student for public humiliation is never a private matter, Mrs. Carter replied, entering the room fully. She glanced at the equation on the board, then at Melania's distressed face. Melania, are you all right? Before Melania could answer, Mr. Wilson interjected, we're merely exploring the limits of mathematical talent. Ms. Johnson has demonstrated unusual abilities, and I'm providing an opportunity to showcase them. Mrs. Carter's expression made it clear she didn't believe this explanation for a second. Well, don't let me interrupt your educational opportunity. I'll just observe from the back, if you don't mind. Mr. Wilson minded very much, but refusing would only escalate the situation. He turned back to Melania, his determination hardened by this interference. The challenge stands, Ms. Johnson. Tomorrow, you will solve this equation in front of the class, or admit that your previous work was not your own. The choice is yours. As the bell rang signaling the end of the period, students hurried out, the atmosphere too tense for the usual casual conversations. Melania was the last to leave, her eyes fixed on the equation as if committing it to memory. Mr. Wilson erased it the moment she crossed the threshold. Let her try to look it up or get help now. Tomorrow would be the reckoning he had planned, a public lesson in respecting authority and hierarchy that his classroom sorely needed. In the quiet corner of the school library, Melania traced the equation from memory into her notebook, her hand steady despite the turmoil inside her. The complex differential equation Mr. Wilson had presented was meant to humiliate her, to expose her as a fraud. Instead, it had awakened something she had spent years carefully suppressing, the pure joy of mathematical challenge. As she examined the equation, memories flooded back from a childhood that seemed distant now. At 4 years old, while other children were learning to count to 10, Melania had discovered multiplication on her own, recognizing patterns in groups of objects. By 6, she was secretly solving her older cousin's algebra homework, carefully erasing her work so no one would notice. Her mother had recognized her gift early but had also recognized the danger it posed. The world isn't always kind to little black girls who are too smart, she had warned. Especially in places where people already don't expect much from us. They had moved often during her elementary years, her mother searching for better opportunities, better schools. But each new environment brought the same challenges. Teachers who didn't believe her work was her own. Classmates who resented her abilities. Administrators who suggested she was disruptive when she finished assignments too quickly or asked questions beyond the curriculum. By 5th grade, Melania had learned to hide her talents, to perform just well enough to avoid negative attention but never so well that she stood out. She discovered that invisibility was safer than excellence, especially after the incident in 7th grade when a teacher had physically shoved her for showing off by correcting his solution to a geometry problem. The memory of that day still brought phantom pain to her back. But the deeper wound had been to her spirit, the clear message that her brilliance was unwelcome, threatening, something to be suppressed rather than celebrated. And yet, here in the solitude of the library, surrounded by books that had been her only consistent friends through years of hiding, Melania felt a familiar excitement as she examined Mr. Wilson's equation. It was indeed advanced, a third-order nonlinear differential equation with variable coefficients. But it wasn't unfamiliar to her. Last summer, while her classmates were at the beach or the mall, Melania had worked her way through 3 undergraduate mathematics textbooks she had found at a used bookstore. Differential equations had been particularly fascinating, like complex puzzles with multiple solutions depending on the approach. She began working through potential solution methods, her pencil flying across the page. The separable variable approach wouldn't work here, nor would simple substitution, but what about a power series? Or perhaps, yes, this was a disguised Bernoulli equation if she transformed the variables correctly. So absorbed was she in the mathematical beauty unfolding in her notebook that she didn't notice Mrs. Carter approaching until the history teacher's shadow fell across her page. "That looks nothing like the history essay that's due in my class tomorrow," Mrs. Carter said, though her tone was gentle. Melania quickly closed her notebook. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. I'll start on it right away." Mrs. Carter sat down across from her. "That was quite a scene in Mr. Wilson's class today." Melania stared at her hands. "I shouldn't have walked out yesterday. Or come back today." "On the contrary," Mrs. Carter replied. "You had every right to leave an environment where you were being mistreated. And every right to return to continue your education." She reached across the table and gently tapped Melania's closed notebook. "What I saw on your page just now didn't look like the work of someone who cheated on a quiz." Melania remained silent, years of protective habits difficult to break. "How long have you been hiding your abilities, Melania?" Mrs. Carter asked softly. The unexpected gentleness of the question broke something inside her. Tears welled in Melania's eyes. "Since I was 7, she whispered. "It's easier that way." Mrs. Carter's expression reflected a profound understanding, the kind that comes only from shared experience. "Easier, perhaps. But at what cost to your spirit? To your future?" "People don't like it when I'm too smart," Melania said simply. "Especially in math. Especially me." The unspoken truth hung between them, the intersecting prejudices that made a mathematically gifted black girl a target from multiple directions. "I understand," Mrs. Carter said. "More than you know. But hiding your light doesn't actually make the world brighter, Melania. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is simply be excellently, unapologetically ourselves." She stood, straightening her blazer. "Whatever you decide to do tomorrow, know that I'll be there. And know that your gift is not a burden to be hidden, it's a power to be wielded." As Mrs. Carter walked away, Melania opened her notebook again. The partial solutions she had already derived filled half a page with elegant mathematical poetry that few in the school could comprehend, let alone create. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the pure, uncomplicated joy of mathematics without fear, the beautiful certainty of numbers, the elegant dance of variables and functions across the page. This was who she was. This was what she loved. The question remained, after so many years of careful invisibility, was she ready to be seen? Melania stood at her bedroom window, watching rain streak down the glass as evening settled over their small apartment complex. Her notebook lay open on her desk, the differential equation now fully solved through 3 different approaches. The work had been challenging but exhilarating, like finally stretching muscles long held in uncomfortable constraint. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Jasmine's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," Melania answered softly. "Are you okay?" Jasmine's voice was tight with concern. "That was seriously messed up what Mr. Wilson did today." "I'm fine," Melania replied automatically, the response she'd given to every expression of concern for years, regardless of its truth. "No, you're not," Jasmine countered. "Nobody would be. He set you up to fail in front of everyone. It's cruel." Melania sighed, sitting on the edge of her bed. "What would you do if you were me? Tomorrow, I mean." "I'd tell him where to shove his equation," Jasmine said immediately, then laughed. "But I'm not you. What do you want to do?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Part of Melania wanted to stay home tomorrow, to avoid the confrontation entirely. Another part wanted to solve the problem brilliantly, to see the shock on Mr. Wilson's face. And still another part, the part that had kept her safe for years, urged her to fail deliberately, to maintain the protective invisibility she had cultivated. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Can you solve it?" Jasmine asked after a pause. "For real?" Melania glanced at her notebook. "Yes." "Wait, seriously?" Jasmine's surprise was evident even through the phone. That was like, college-level stuff he put up there. "Graduate level, actually," Melania corrected without thinking. "But yes, I can solve it." The line went quiet for a moment. "Mel," Jasmine said finally, using the nickname only she was allowed to use, "have you been a secret math genius this whole time?" The direct question hit Melania like a physical blow. Years of hiding, of deflection, of careful mediocrity, and now the truth hung in the air between them. "Yes," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "Wow," Jasmine breathed. That's amazing. Why did you hide it?" The rain intensified outside, drumming against the window. "It's complicated. Try me." So Melania did. She told Jasmine about the early years of standing out, the negative attention, the incident with the teacher that had left her with chronic back pain and a deeper fear of being seen. She explained her mother's warnings about the world's treatment of exceptional black girls. She described the peace she had found in invisibility, the safety of being overlooked. "That's messed up," Jasmine said when she finished. "Not you hiding, the fact that you had to hide. That people made you feel like you had to." "Yeah," Melania agreed, surprised by how good it felt to finally share this truth with someone her own age. "It is messed up." "So what are you going to do tomorrow?" Jasmine asked again. Melania closed her eyes, considering the options one more time. "I don't know yet." "Well, whatever you decide, I've got your back," Jasmine promised. "But for what it's worth, I think the world needs more girls like you to stop hiding how brilliant they are." After they hung up, Melania returned to her desk and the completed solutions. Her mother wouldn't be home for hours, the night shift at the hospital kept her away until dawn most days. It was just Melania and her thoughts and the beautiful mathematics that had always been her true language. She traced the final equation with her fingertip, admiring the elegance of the solution. There was something profound in the way mathematics revealed the underlying patterns of a universe, patterns that existed whether anyone acknowledged them or not. Truth that remained truth, even when hidden. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Mrs. Carter. "Remember, your gift is not a burden. It's a power." The words resonated with something deep inside her. For years, she had treated her mathematical abilities as a dangerous secret to be guarded. What would it mean to see them instead as a power she could wield? Melania opened a fresh page in her notebook and began writing again, not more solutions, but a plan. If she was going to reveal herself after all these years, she would do it on her terms. Mr. Wilson thought to humiliate her with an impossible challenge. Instead, she would transform it into an opportunity to reclaim something precious she had surrendered long ago, her authentic self. She worked late into the night, preparing for every possible scenario, every reaction, every consequence. When she finally went to bed, the rain had stopped and a strange calm had settled over her. The decision was made. Tomorrow would be different from all the days that had come before. As sleep claimed her, Melania's thoughts drifted to the elegant mathematical proof she had completed. In mathematics, there was a concept called existence and uniqueness, the idea that for certain types of problems, a solution not only exists but is the only possible solution. Tomorrow, she would demonstrate her own existence and uniqueness, the only possible Melania Johnson, brilliant and unafraid. The alarm would ring all too soon. The classroom was unusually quiet when Melania entered, all eyes turning toward her. Word had spread throughout the school about Mr. Wilson's challenge, transforming an ordinary Thursday into a spectator event. Even students who normally skipped class had shown up, eager to witness the confrontation. Mr. Wilson stood at the front, the complex equation already displayed on the board. He looked smugly confident, a half-smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched Melania make her way to the back of the room. "Ah, Ms. Johnson," he said, checking his watch with exaggerated precision. "How good of you to join us. I was beginning to think you might not appear for our little mathematical challenge." Melania set her backpack down carefully. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her face remained calm, a skill perfected through years of hiding in plain sight. "I'm here," she said simply, her voice soft but steady. Mr. Wilson's smile widened. "Excellent. Then let's not waste any more time." He gestured grandly toward the board. "As promised yesterday, this is a differential equation typically encountered at the graduate level of mathematical study. I've given you 24 hours to prepare." The implication was clear, he believed she had either sought help or was about to admit defeat. Either outcome would satisfy his need to put her in her place. "If you can solve this equation," he continued, addressing the entire class now, "you will demonstrate extraordinary mathematical talent. If not..." He shrugged. "Well, we'll consider yesterday's quiz an anomaly and move forward accordingly." The classroom door opened, and Mrs. Carter slipped in quietly, taking a position at the back of the room. She nodded encouragingly at Melania. Jasmine reached over and squeezed Melania's hand. "You've got this," she whispered. Melania took a deep breath and moved toward the board. Every step felt significant, as if she were crossing an invisible boundary between her old life and whatever would come after this moment. Mr. Wilson held out a marker, his expression one of barely concealed triumph. "The floor is yours, Ms. Johnson. Show us what you know." Melania accepted the marker, their fingers briefly touching in the exchange. His were cold and dry, hers were warm and steady. Standing before the equation, Melania felt a sudden calm descend over her. The classroom, the staring students, even Mr. Wilson's looming presence, all faded into the background. There was only her and the mathematics, a language she had loved since before she could remember. She began to write, her hand moving with confident precision. First, she outlined her approach, a transformation of variables followed by a series solution. Her writing was neat, methodical, each step flowing logically into the next. Behind her, she could hear the shuffle of confusion from her classmates, the occasional whispered, "What is she doing?" and, "Is that even English?" But she remained focused, immersed in the pure joy of mathematical reasoning. Mr. Wilson's initial smugness gradually morphed into confusion, then disbelief, as Melania continued to work through the problem with obvious competence. She had covered half the board with elegant mathematical notation when he finally spoke, his voice strained. "Where did you learn this approach, Ms. Johnson?" he demanded. Without turning, Melania replied, "I taught myself differential equations last summer. This is a modified Bernoulli equation after the appropriate substitution." A few students gasped at her casual explanation. Teaching herself graduate-level mathematics over summer vacation was so far beyond their conception of normal teenage activities that it bordered on the fantastical. Impossible, Mr. Wilson muttered, but loudly enough for the front row to hear. You must have had help. Melania paused, the marker hovering over the board. She turned to face him directly, meeting his eyes for perhaps the first time all year. No, Mr. Wilson, she said clearly. I didn't have help. I've never had help. That's been the problem all along. The simple statement hung in the air, laden with meanings Mr. Wilson couldn't begin to comprehend. Melania turned back to the board and continued her solution. 10 minutes passed in absolute silence except for the squeak of the marker against the whiteboard. Melania filled the remaining space with equations, working steadily toward the conclusion that she had already reached in her notebook the night before. When she wrote the final line, the complete analytical solution to the differential equation, she capped the marker and stepped back, surveying her work with a critical eye. It was correct. She knew it with the same certainty that she knew her own name. She turned to face the class, marker still in hand. Every face reflected some variation of shock, from Jasmine's open-mouthed amazement to Cynthia Reynolds' wide-eyed disbelief. Only Mrs. Carter smiled, a quiet pride evident in her expression. And Mr. Wilson? His face had drained of color, the ruddy complexion now ashen as he stared at the board, desperately searching for an error, a mistake, any flaw that would validate his assumption of her incompetence. He found none. That's not possible, he finally stammered. No high school student could solve this. Melania met his gaze steadily. I just did. The silence that followed Melania's simple declaration stretched until it became uncomfortable. Students glanced between her confident stance and Mr. Wilson's increasingly flustered expression, witnessing a power shift so dramatic it was almost visible in the air between them. Mr. Wilson approached the board, scrutinizing the solution with narrowed eyes. His finger traced the equations, searching for errors, inconsistencies, anything to discredit the mathematical evidence before him. Finding none immediately apparent, he grasped at straws. This is merely the framework of a solution, he declared, turning to address the class as if Melania were no longer present. Anyone can copy formulas and approaches from textbooks. True understanding requires. There's actually an error in the original equation, Melania interrupted quietly. Mr. Wilson froze mid-gesture, his head swiveling slowly back toward her. Excuse me. In the original equation, Melania continued, her voice gaining strength, there's a sign error in the second term. It should be negative, not positive. I corrected it in my solution, but I should have mentioned it earlier. The class collectively held its breath. Challenging the equation itself was beyond audacious, it was mathematical heresy in Mr. Wilson's kingdom. Impossible, he snapped. I took this directly from a graduate-level textbook. Melania nodded. Yes, probably Hoffman's Advanced Differential Equations. There's a known error in the first edition that was corrected in subsequent printings. It's mentioned in the errata sheet. Mr. Wilson's face contorted with a mixture of emotions, disbelief, embarrassment, and growing anger. And I suppose you've read Hoffman's textbook as well, he asked sarcastically. Yes, Melania replied simply. Along with Thompson's Modern Analysis and Chen's Principles of Mathematical Modeling. They approached the same class of problems from different perspectives. She stepped forward and uncapped the marker again. May I show you something else about this equation? Without waiting for permission, she began writing on a clean section of the board. If we extend this solution to consider real-world applications in fluid dynamics, there's a fascinating connection to turbulence modeling. Her hand moved quickly now, no longer constrained by the careful pace she had maintained earlier. This was Melania in her element, exploring the mathematics she loved with the freedom of someone who no longer needed to hide. The same equation structure appears in computational models for atmospheric boundary layers, she explained, adding diagrams to illustrate her point. But with a slight modification, we can apply it to oceanographic mixing patterns or even blood flow through arterial networks. Students who had been merely shocked before now watched in open amazement. Melania wasn't just solving the equation, she was extending it, connecting it to real-world applications, demonstrating a depth of understanding that transcended mere computational skill. Mr. Wilson stood frozen, his authority and expertise crumbling before the entire class. This quiet girl from the back row, whom he had dismissed as unremarkable, was delivering what amounted to a graduate-level lecture on applications of differential equations. This is particularly relevant to current research in climate modeling, Melania continued, adding another layer of equations. The nonlinear behavior captured here is critical for understanding feedback mechanisms in complex atmospheric systems. She paused, marker still in hand, suddenly aware of the absolute silence in the room. Every face was turned toward her, some confused, some amazed, but all attentive in a way she had never experienced before. I'm sorry, she said, her confidence faltering slightly. I get carried away with the applications sometimes. Don't apologize, Mrs. Carter said from the back of the room. Continue, please. Something in the teacher's tone, a mixture of encouragement and authority, seemed to break the spell of silence. A student in the second row raised her hand tentatively. How does this connect to what we're learning in physics about fluid dynamics? She asked. Melania blinked in surprise. No one had ever asked for her explanation before. After a moment's hesitation, she smiled and turned back to the board. That's a great question. Let me show you. For the next 20 minutes, Melania led an impromptu discussion that transformed Mr. Wilson's intended humiliation into something entirely different, a genuine exploration of advanced mathematics and its applications. Students who had never shown interest in equations before asked questions, drawn in by Melania's evident passion and clear explanations. Throughout it all, Mr. Wilson remained silent, his plan triumphed now a spectacular backfire. When the bell finally rang, students gathered their things reluctantly, the usual rush for the door replaced by lingering conversations about what they had just witnessed. As the room emptied, Cynthia Reynolds, queen of the front row and Mr. Wilson's favorite student, approached Melania with a mixture of awe and confusion. Why did you hide this? She asked. You could have been at the top of the class all along. Melania considered the question seriously. Sometimes being at the top makes you a target, she said finally. And sometimes there are more important things than being recognized. Cynthia frowned, clearly struggling with a concept entirely foreign to her experience. Well, you were amazing today, she said before following her friends out the door. Left alone with Mr. Wilson and Mrs. Carter, Melania began gathering her belongings, suddenly exhausted by the emotional toll of her public revelation. Ms. Johnson, Mr. Wilson said stiffly, breaking his long silence. I believe we need to discuss your academic future. This level of mathematical aptitude clearly requires adjustments to your educational program. His tone remained formal, but the underlying message was clear. He recognized her ability, even if he couldn't quite bring himself to apologize for his misjudgment. I believe that conversation should include Principal Davis, Mrs. Carter interjected smoothly. And Melania's mother, of course. Of course, Mr. Wilson agreed quickly, eager to reclaim some professional dignity. I'll make the arrangements immediately. As he hurried from the room, Mrs. Carter approached Melania with a warm smile. Well, she said, that was quite a demonstration. Melania exhaled slowly, the tension of the past 24 hours finally releasing. I didn't plan to go that far with the applications. I just showed your true self, Mrs. Carter finished for her. How does it feel? Melania considered the question, searching for the right words to describe the complex emotions swirling within her. Terrifying, she admitted. But also liberating? Mrs. Carter suggested. Yes, Melania agreed, a genuine smile spreading across her face. Exactly that. By lunchtime, the story had spread throughout Westridge High with the speed and creative embellishment typical of teenage gossip. In some versions, Melania had reduced Mr. Wilson to tears, in others, she had revealed herself as a secret mathematical prodigy being scouted by MIT. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in between, but all versions agreed on one essential fact: Melania Johnson was not who everyone had thought she was. She sat alone in the cafeteria, the usual invisibility that had protected her for years now shattered. Students stared openly, conversations pausing as she passed, the weight of her newfound notoriety both uncomfortable and strangely validating. "Mind if I join the celebrity mathematician?" Jasmine asked, sliding into the seat across from her with a tray of cafeteria pizza. Melania smiled gratefully at her friend. "Is it as bad as it feels?" "Worse," Jasmine confirmed cheerfully. "Apparently, you've been offered a job at NASA, and you're secretly the daughter of a famous mathematician hiding in witness protection." "Great," Melania groaned, poking at her salad without enthusiasm. "Hey, you knew this would happen once you showed them who you really are," Jasmine pointed out. "No going back to invisibility now." Melania sighed. "I know. I just didn't expect it to feel so overwhelming," Jasmine suggested. "Exactly." Before Jasmine could respond, a shadow fell across their table. Melania looked up to find Principal Davis standing there, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Johnson," he said formally, "I'd like to see you in my office after lunch, please." Melania nodded, her stomach tightening. "Is everything okay?" "That's what we need to discuss," he replied neutrally. "Mrs. Carter will be joining us, and we've called your mother as well." As he walked away, Jasmine raised her eyebrows. "That sounds serious." "It probably is," Melania agreed, her appetite now completely gone. The euphoria of the morning's triumph was rapidly fading, replaced by anxiety about potential consequences. Had she gone too far? Would Mr. Wilson find a way to punish her for embarrassing him? When Melania arrived at the principal's office after lunch, she was surprised to find not only Mrs. Carter waiting, but also Dr. Eleanor Wright, the university mathematics professor whose work she had cited during her impromptu lecture. "Melania," Mrs. Carter greeted her warmly, "this is Dr. Wright from the university. She's the faculty advisor for the mathematics enrichment program I told you about." Dr. Wright, a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair and keen eyes, extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Melania. I've heard quite an extraordinary account of your mathematical abilities from Mrs. Carter." Melania shook the professor's hand, momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the office door opened again, and her mother rushed in, still wearing her hospital scrubs. "I came as soon as I could," she said, slightly breathless. "What's happened? Is Melania in trouble?" Principal Davis, who had been observing from behind his desk, stood to greet her. "Not at all, Ms. Johnson. Quite the opposite, in fact. Please, everyone, have a seat. We have much to discuss about your daughter's academic future." As they settled into the arranged chairs, Melania noticed Mr. Wilson's conspicuous absence. Reading her expression, Principal Davis added, "Mr. Wilson had a prior commitment. He'll be brought up to speed later." The careful phrasing suggested there was more to the story, but Melania was too overwhelmed by the present situation to dwell on it. "Mrs. Carter has shared with me, and with Dr. Wright, the remarkable events of this morning," Principal Davis began. "It seems we have been unaware of Melania's exceptional mathematical talent." Her mother reached over to squeeze Melania's hand. "She's always been gifted with numbers," she said softly. "Even as a little girl. What concerns me," Principal Davis continued, "is not just the revelation of this talent, but the fact that it has remained hidden for so long. Our educational system is designed to identify and nurture exceptional abilities. Somewhere, that system failed Melania." Melania's mother stiffened. With all due respect, it wasn't the system that failed her. It was the people within it who made her feel that being exceptional was dangerous. The principal nodded, accepting the correction. "A fair point, Ms. Johnson. And one that we are taking very seriously. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting." He gestured to Dr. Wright, who leaned forward with evident enthusiasm. "Melania, what you demonstrated this morning, solving that differential equation and extending it to real-world applications, represents mathematical thinking well beyond undergraduate level. We've established an accelerated program at the university for exceptional students like yourself, allowing you to take college-level mathematics courses while completing your high school requirements. Melania blinked, struggling to process this unexpected turn of events. You want me to take college classes? If you're interested, Dr. Wright confirmed. Based on Mrs. Carter's description of your work this morning, you would likely place directly into our upper division courses. It would be challenging, certainly, but I suspect you've been craving that kind of challenge for some time. Melania's mother looked concerned. What would this mean practically? Melania is only 15. She would remain enrolled at Westridge for most subjects, Principal Davis explained. But for mathematics, she would attend classes at the university 3 days a week. We would adjust her schedule accordingly and provide transportation credits. And the cost? Her mother asked, the question revealing her primary concern. The program is fully funded, Dr. Wright assured her. Including materials and transportation. We have a grant specifically designed to support exceptional students from diverse backgrounds. This is a lot to take in, Melania's mother said, looking at her daughter. What do you think, Melania? All eyes turned to her, waiting for her response. Yesterday, the attention would have made her shrink into herself, seeking invisibility. Today, after revealing her true abilities, Melania found she could meet their gazes without the familiar anxiety. I'd like to try, she said finally. But I have some concerns about Mr. Wilson. Principal Davis's expression tightened slightly. Yes, well. Regarding Mr. Wilson. There will be some adjustments to his teaching approach moving forward. The events of this morning have prompted a review of certain classroom practices. The careful phrasing told Melania everything she needed to know. Mr. Wilson was in trouble, perhaps serious trouble, for his attempt to publicly humiliate a student. We've also discussed your back condition, Mrs. Carter added gently. The university facilities include ergonomic options that should be more comfortable for you during extended study sessions. And we'll be implementing those same accommodations here at Westridge immediately, Principal Davis added, a hint of apology in his tone. Your medical documentation should have been fully respected from the beginning. Melania nodded, momentarily overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her reality. Yesterday, she had been invisible, hiding her abilities for safety. Today, those same abilities were being celebrated, accommodated, nurtured. There's one more thing, Dr. Wright said, reaching into her briefcase. She pulled out a worn book with a familiar cover, Hoffman's Advanced Differential Equations, the very text Melania had referenced that morning. Mrs. Carter mentioned you've been teaching yourself from whatever resources you could find, the professor said, sliding the book across the table. This is my personal copy, with notes in the margins that might interest you. Consider it on loan until you're enrolled in our program. Melania accepted the book reverently, opening it to find pages dense with handwritten annotations, questions, connections, insights from a mathematical mind that seemed to think the way she did. Thank you, she whispered, tears threatening to spill. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Dr. Wright replied with a gentle smile. Just keep doing mathematics the way you did this morning, with joy, with creativity, and without hiding. As the meeting concluded and they filed out of the office, Melania clutched the borrowed textbook to her chest, still processing the dramatic reversal of her circumstances. Her mother walked beside her, unusually quiet. Are you okay with all this, Mom? Melania asked hesitantly. Her mother stopped, turning to face her daughter fully. Melania, all I've ever wanted is for you to be safe and to have opportunities one didn't have. I worried that being too exceptional would make you a target. Maybe I was wrong to let you hide. You weren't wrong, Melania said softly. The world can be hard on girls who stand out, especially black girls who excel in fields where people don't expect to see us. But maybe, her mother continued, hiding your light doesn't make the darkness go away. It just leaves the world with less light. She smoothed a hand over Melania's hair. I'm proud of you for shining today. No matter what happens next. Melania smiled, a weight lifting that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. I think I'm ready to stop hiding. As they walked toward the exit, students in the hallway paused to 2 weeks after the incident that the students now simply called the equation, Melania found herself walking across the university campus beside Dr. Wright. The academic buildings rose impressively around them, solid brick structures that seemed to hum with intellectual energy. Students hurried past, laden with books and laptops, giving curious glances to the high school girl in their midst. "Nervous?" Dr. Wright asked, noticing Melania's tight grip on her backpack straps. "A little," Melania admitted. "It's all happening so fast." Indeed, the pace of change in her life had been dizzying. After the meeting in Principal Davis's office, events had unfolded with remarkable speed. Placement tests had confirmed what Dr. Wright already suspected: Melania's mathematical knowledge extended well beyond undergraduate fundamentals. Arrangements had been made, schedules adjusted, and now, just 14 days later, she was about to attend her first university-level class in advanced theoretical mathematics. "The academic committee was quite impressed with your test results," Dr. Wright commented as they approached the mathematics building. "Professor Jankowski particularly enjoyed your novel approach to the Riemann hypothesis problem. He said it showed refreshing originality." Melania smiled tentatively. Praise for her mathematical abilities was still foreign territory, uncomfortable yet deeply gratifying. "Here we are," Dr. Wright announced, stopping before a heavy wooden door. "Room 342. The students have been told to expect you, though I should warn you, mathematicians aren't always the most socially adept bunch. They may stare." "I'm used to being stared at," Melania replied quietly. "Just for different reasons now." Dr. Wright's expression softened with understanding. "Remember, you belong here as much as anyone. Your mind earned you this place." She glanced at her watch. "I'll leave you to it. Professor Chen doesn't appreciate interruptions once lecture begins." With a reassuring squeeze of Melania's shoulder, Dr. Wright departed, leaving her alone at the threshold of her new academic journey. Taking a deep breath, Melania pushed open the door. The lecture hall was smaller than she had imagined, just 30 seats arranged in a semicircle, about half of them occupied by students who looked at least 5 years older than her. Conversations halted mid-sentence as heads turned toward the newcomer. Melania froze momentarily, the familiar urge to become invisible washing over her. But then she straightened her shoulders, remembering Mrs. Carter's words: "Your gift is not a burden, it's a power." She selected a seat near the front, ignoring the curious stares, and began unpacking her materials: notebook, pencils, the copy of Chen's Principles of Mathematical Modeling that her mother had managed to find at a second-hand bookstore after learning it was on the course reading list. A young man with rumpled hair and wire-rimmed glasses leaned over from the adjacent seat. "You're her, aren't you?" the high school prodigy Dr. Wright mentioned. Melania nodded cautiously. "I'm Melania." "Marcus," he replied, offering his hand. "Second-year graduate student. We've been wondering what kind of mathematical mind could impress Eleanor Wright. She's notoriously difficult to impress." Before Melania could respond, the door opened again, and Professor Chen entered, a slight, elderly man whose eyes sparkled with keen intelligence behind thick glasses. The room immediately fell silent. "Good afternoon," he began without preamble. "Today we will explore the application of stochastic differential equations to quantum field theory. But first, I believe we have a new addition to our class." All eyes turned to Melania again. Professor Chen peered at her over his glasses. "Ms. Johnson, I presume. Dr. Wright speaks very highly of your mathematical intuition. We shall see if her assessment is accurate." Without waiting for a response, he turned to the board and began writing equations at a pace that would have left most high school students bewildered. Melania, however, found herself following easily, the mathematical language as clear to her as her native tongue. When Professor Chen paused to ask a question about the derivation he had just presented, Melania found her hand rising almost involuntarily. A lifetime habit of hiding her knowledge battled with her new resolution to embrace her abilities. Professor Chen nodded her way. "Ms. Johnson. The transition from the second to third step assumes continuous differentiability," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. But for certain quantum systems, we might need to consider jump discontinuities at the boundary conditions. A brief silence followed her observation. Professor Chen's expression remained impassive for a moment before his lips curved into a slight smile. Precisely correct, Ms. Johnson. An insight many of my graduate students miss. He turned back to the board. Let us consider, then, the implications of such discontinuities. The lecture continued for another hour, during which Melania contributed twice more, each time receiving that same slight nod of approval from Professor Chen. By the session's end, the initial stares from her classmates had transformed into expressions of respect, and in some cases, outright admiration. As they packed up their materials, Marcus turned to her again. So, the rumors are true. You really are a mathematics phenom. Melania shook her head, embarrassed by the label. I just love the subject. Always have. Well, a few of us meet at the campus coffee shop after class to work on problem sets together, he offered. You're welcome to join, if you want. Fair warning, it usually devolves into arguments about whether mathematics is discovered or invented. The invitation caught her off guard. Casual social acceptance in an academic context was entirely new territory. I'd like that, she managed. Thank you. As the students filed out, Professor Chen beckoned Melania to his desk. Ms. Johnson, a moment. She approached cautiously, still conditioned to expect criticism or dismissal from authority figures. Dr. Wright mentioned the circumstances that brought you to our program, he said, adjusting his glasses. A teacher who attempted to humiliate you with an equation beyond high school level. Melania nodded uncomfortably, not wanting to revisit that memory. I experienced something similar as a young man in Taiwan, Professor Chen continued, surprising her. A mathematics teacher who believed poor students from fishing villages could not possess true mathematical talent. He gave me an impossible problem to solve as punishment for correcting his error. What happened? Melania asked, captivated by this unexpected connection. A rare smile creased Professor Chen's weathered face. I solved it, of course. And 40 years later, I still remember the look on his face. He gathered his lecture notes methodically. Sometimes, Ms. Johnson, the people who try to limit us instead become the catalysts for our greatest achievements. He placed a thin folder on the desk between them. This is information about the International Mathematics Olympiad. The university sponsors participants each year. Based on what I observed today, you should consider applying. Melania accepted the folder with widening eyes. The IMO was the most prestigious mathematics competition for pre-university students in the world. She had read about it, dreamed about it, but never imagined herself as a potential competitor. You think I could qualify? She asked, unable to hide her excitement. I think, Professor Chen replied deliberately, that you have barely begun to discover what you are capable of. He gestured toward the door. Now go join your study group. Mathematics is a collaborative endeavor, despite what many believe. As Melania hurried across campus toward the coffee shop, clutching the IMO folder, her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, meeting with Principal Davis and Mr. Wilson tomorrow at 4. Dr. Wright will be there too. The reminder of Mr. Wilson sent a chill through her momentary euphoria. Despite everything that had happened, the university program, the recognition, the new possibilities opening before her, there remained the unresolved situation with the teacher who had tried to humiliate her. She hesitated outside the coffee shop, watching through the window as Marcus and several other students arranged tables together, making space for her both literally and figuratively in their academic world. Her old instinct urged caution, protection, withdrawal from potential conflict. But Melania was tired of hiding. Whatever tomorrow's meeting held, she would face it as her true self, the self she was just beginning to fully recognize and embrace. With renewed determination, she pushed open the door to join her new peers, ready to argue passionately about whether mathematics was discovered or invented. Discovered, obviously, the patterns existed whether humans perceived them or not. Tomorrow would take care of itself. Today, there was mathematics to explore. The principal's office seemed smaller than Melania remembered, perhaps because there were more people crowded into it this time. Principal Davis sat behind his desk, hands folded before him. Dr. Wright occupied a chair to his right, reviewing documents in a manila folder. Melania and her mother sat side by side, tense but composed. And then there was Mr. Wilson, seated slightly apart from the others, his usually commanding presence diminished somehow. His complexion was pallid, his half-bald head gleaming with a faint sheen of perspiration despite the room's comfortable temperature. He had not made eye contact with Melania since she entered. "Thank you all for coming," Principal Davis began, his tone formally neutral. "As you know, we're here to discuss the events of 2 weeks ago and their implications going forward." Mr. Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, causing the chair to creak audibly. "Dr. Wright has provided a comprehensive assessment of Melania's mathematical abilities," Principal Davis continued, nodding toward the university professor. "It confirms what became apparent during the incident in Mr. Wilson's classroom." "Incident," Melania's mother repeated with a pointed emphasis that made the principal wince slightly. "Perhaps challenge-based assessment would be more accurate," Dr. Wright suggested diplomatically, though the slight arch of her eyebrows suggested she was fully aware of what had actually transpired. Principal Davis cleared his throat. "Yes, well, regardless of terminology, the situation has prompted a thorough review of our advanced placement protocols and accommodation policies." He turned to Mr. Wilson. "Richard, I believe you have something to say to Melania and Ms. Johnson." All eyes shifted to Mr. Wilson, who seemed to physically shrink under the collective gaze. He straightened his tie needlessly, then finally looked up, making brief eye contact with Melania before quickly glancing away again. "Ms. Johnson, Melania," he began, his voice lacking its usual authoritative resonance. "I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air, simple yet clearly difficult for him to deliver. "My treatment of you was unprofessional and inappropriate. I allowed personal biases and assumptions to cloud my judgment of your abilities and character." He paused, struggling visibly. "I was wrong. Not just about your mathematical talent, which is extraordinary, but about my responsibilities as an educator." Melania studied him carefully, searching for any hint of the condescension or false contrition that she had half expected. Instead, she saw something surprising, genuine remorse, perhaps even shame. "The equation I presented was intended to, well, the intention is clear enough," Mr. Wilson continued, unable to explicitly admit his attempt to humiliate her. "Instead, it revealed my own shortcomings as a teacher, and for that, I am truly sorry." Melania's mother shifted forward. "And what about her back condition? The accommodation you repeatedly questioned and belittled?" Mr. Wilson flinched visibly. "That was inexcusable. I've since reviewed Melania's medical documentation thoroughly. My dismissiveness caused real physical discomfort, and for that, I am especially remorseful." Principal Davis interjected smoothly. "As part of our protocol review, all faculty will undergo additional training on accommodation requirements and implicit bias recognition. Mr. Wilson has volunteered to lead the mathematics department's implementation of these new guidelines." "Volunteered," Melania's mother repeated skeptically. "It was strongly suggested," Dr. Wright murmured, just loudly enough to be heard. Mr. Wilson straightened in his chair, something of his former dignity reasserting itself. "It was necessary," he corrected. "I've spent 23 years teaching mathematics based on what I thought was an objective assessment of student potential. Recent events have forced me to reconsider much of what I believed about recognizing mathematical talent." He turned to face Melania directly for the first time. "Your solution approach to the differential equation wasn't just correct, it was elegant. More elegant than my own graduate work on similar problems. I've spent the past 2 weeks reviewing your previous assignments, and the pattern is clear. You've been solving problems at a level far beyond the curriculum, then deliberately obscuring your methods to appear average." Melania nodded slightly, neither confirming nor denying his observation. "May I ask why?" he asked, genuine curiosity replacing his usual judgmental tone. Melania glanced at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "It was safer," she said simply. "Being exceptional made me a target. Being invisible was protective." Mr. Wilson absorbed this, his expression troubled. And I reinforced that lesson instead of creating an environment where your talents could flourish. He shook his head slowly. That is the greatest failure of my teaching career. What happens now? Melania's mother asked, addressing the question to Principal Davis rather than Mr. Wilson. Melania will continue with the university program for her mathematics education, Principal Davis explained. For her other subjects, she'll remain at Westridge with appropriate accommodations fully implemented. He hesitated briefly. As for Mr. Wilson, he will no longer be teaching Melania's grade level. I've requested reassignment to freshman algebra, Mr. Wilson added quietly. I believe I need to relearn certain fundamentals of education myself. Melania blinked in surprise. Teaching freshman algebra was generally considered a step down in prestige. Mr. Wilson had always taught the advanced classes exclusively. Additionally, Dr. Wright interjected, Mr. Wilson has agreed to assist with our outreach program for mathematically gifted students from underrepresented groups. His experience with misjudging talent based on preconceptions may prove valuable in helping other educators avoid similar mistakes. Mr. Wilson nodded, accepting this assessment without protest. Principal Davis closed the folder before him. Unless there are other concerns to address, I believe that concludes our official business. He looked to Melania and her mother. Is there anything else you wish to discuss? Melania's mother turned to her daughter. Melania? This is primarily about your education and well-being. Melania considered carefully, aware that her response would likely determine the final outcome of this situation. Part of her wanted to demand harsher consequences for Mr. Wilson, a vindication for years of hiding, for the pain she had endured, for the talents she had suppressed. But another part, perhaps the mathematician in her, recognized the elegance of the current solution. Mr. Wilson wasn't being protected from the consequences of his actions, he was being given an opportunity to transform them into something constructive. I think this is fair, she said finally. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. Even teachers. Something shifted in Mr. Wilson's expression, relief mingled with a newfound respect. Thank you, Melania, he said quietly. I don't deserve your graciousness. It's not about deserving, she replied with a wisdom beyond her years. It's about what happens next. As they prepared to leave, Mr. Wilson approached Melania hesitantly. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his briefcase. He withdrew a worn, hardcover book, Patterns in Prime Numbers, by Dr. Eleanor Wright. I believe you might find this interesting, he said, offering it to her. Dr. Wright mentioned you're considering the Mathematics Olympiad. This covers some topics that frequently appear in the competition. Melania accepted the book, noting the careful annotations in the margins, Mr. Wilson's own notes from his graduate studies. Thank you, she said, genuinely touched by the gesture. As they left the office, her mother squeezed her hand. You continue to amaze me, Melania. Not just with your mathematical brilliance, but with your capacity for forgiveness. Melania considered this as they walked toward the parking lot. It's not really forgiveness, she said thoughtfully. It's more like seeing the full equation. There are more variables at play than just me and Mr. Wilson. Her mother laughed softly. Even your metaphors are mathematical. Some patterns are universal, Melania replied with a smile, clutching her new book to her chest as they stepped into the bright afternoon sunshine. 6 months after the equation incident, Westridge High School's auditorium was packed to capacity. Parents, students, and faculty filled every seat, with latecomers standing along the walls. On stage, a banner proclaimed, Mathematics Olympiad Regional Champions. Melania stood at the podium, still uncomfortable with public speaking but growing more confident with each passing day. Her journey from invisibility to recognition had been challenging but transformative. Mathematics isn't just about numbers, she began, her voice soft but clear through the microphone. It's about patterns, recognizing them, understanding them, and sometimes challenging them. In the front row, her mother beamed with pride, sitting next to Mrs. Carter, whose early recognition of Melania's potential had been a crucial turning point. Dr. Wright and Professor Chen represented the university contingent, while Principal Davis nodded encouragingly from his administrative seat. 6 months ago, I believed that hiding my abilities was the only way to survive. I had learned, through difficult experiences, that being exceptional, especially as a young black woman in mathematics, made me a target rather than a treasure. Her gaze swept across the audience, noting the rapt attention on every face. But what I've discovered since then is that visibility, while sometimes frightening, creates possibilities that invisibility never could. The Regional Mathematics Olympiad trophy gleamed on a table beside her, tangible proof of those possibilities. Melania and her team of fellow Westridge students had dominated the competition, solving problems that had stumped participants from prestigious private schools and specialized mathematics academies. None of us succeed alone, she continued. My journey from hiding to standing here today involved many people who chose to see potential where others saw only problems. Her eyes found Jasmine in the second row, the friend who had stood by her through everything. Next to her sat Marcus and several other university students who had welcomed Melania into their study group without hesitation or condescension, treating her as a peer despite her age. I want to especially thank someone who might seem an unlikely ally in my story, Melania said, her voice softening. Mr. Wilson. A murmur rippled through the audience as heads turned toward the mathematics teacher, sitting unobtrusively in the back row. Sometimes the people who challenge us most severely also create opportunities for our greatest growth. Mr. Wilson's equation was intended as an obstacle, but instead became a doorway. In the months since their confrontation, Melania had watched Mr. Wilson undergo his own transformation. The freshman algebra students he now taught spoke of a different teacher than the one she had known, patient, encouraging, quick to praise effort rather than just results. His work with the university outreach program had expanded to include weekend mathematics enrichment sessions for middle school students from underserved communities. The most beautiful thing about mathematical patterns, Melania continued, is that they can always be expanded. What seems like a closed system can open into new dimensions if we approach it with curiosity instead of assumptions. She gestured to the group of younger students seated in a reserved section, middle schoolers from her newly established mentoring program. Melania met with them weekly, guiding them through mathematical concepts beyond their grade level, creating the safe space for exceptional minds that she had never had. Today, we celebrate not just a trophy, but a transformation in how we recognize and nurture talent, all talent, wherever it appears, whatever it looks like. As she concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, Melania felt a sense of completion, not of her journey, which was really just beginning, but of a perfect mathematical proof. The theorem had been established, visibility was worth the risk. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled in the reception area, Mr. Wilson approached Melania carefully, respect evident in his bearing. That was a gracious speech, he said. More generous than I deserved. Melania smiled. It wasn't about generosity. It was about accuracy. Your equation did change everything, just not the way you intended. He nodded, accepting this assessment. The university tells me you've been accepted into their dual enrollment program for next year. Full scholarship. Yes, Melania confirmed. And Professor Chen has agreed to supervise my independent research project on prime number patterns. Remarkable, Mr. Wilson said, and for the first time, there was no trace of resentment or jealousy in his tone, only genuine admiration. You know, in 24 years of teaching, I've never had to reconsider my fundamental approach to education until now. Sometimes the most difficult equations yield the most valuable solutions, Melania replied. Mr. Wilson laughed softly. Still teaching me mathematics, I see. He grew serious again. I wanted you to know that 3 of my freshman students, all girls, as it happens, have shown unusual aptitude this semester. In the past, I might have overlooked them or even discouraged their advancement. Instead, I've recommended them for the accelerated program. That, Melania said, is the best news I've heard all day. As Mr. Wilson moved away, Jasmine bounded up, followed by several of Melania's new friends from both Westridge and the university. Ready to celebrate, math champion? Jasmine asked, linking arms with her. Your mom said we could all go for pizza. Melania looked around at the circle of friends, a diverse group united by intellectual curiosity and mutual respect. 6 months ago, such a scene would have seemed impossible. She had been alone in her mathematical world, hiding her light, shrinking herself to avoid attention. Now, standing tall in her full brilliance, Melania Johnson had discovered that the true solution to the equation of her life wasn't invisibility, but community, finding the people who would celebrate rather than diminish her gifts. Yes, she said, squeezing Jasmine's arm. I'm definitely ready. As they headed toward the exit, Melania glanced back at the auditorium stage where her journey from shadow to spotlight had begun with a teacher's challenge and a student's courage to finally be seen. The most elegant solutions, she had learned, often emerged from the most intimidating problems. It was a mathematical truth, and a life truth, that she would carry forward into all her future equations. ## Chapter 10, Recognition. 2 weeks after the incident that the students now simply called the equation, Melania found herself walking across the university campus beside Dr. Wright. The academic buildings rose impressively around them, solid brick structures that seemed to hum with intellectual energy. Students hurried past, laden with books and laptops, giving curious glances to the high school girl in their midst. Nervous? Dr. Wright asked, noticing Melania's tight grip on her backpack straps. A little, Melania admitted. It's all happening so fast. Indeed, the pace of change in her life had been dizzying. After the meeting in Principal Davis's office, events had unfolded with remarkable speed. Placement tests had confirmed what Dr. Wright already suspected: Melania's mathematical knowledge extended well beyond undergraduate fundamentals. Arrangements had been made, schedules adjusted, and now, just 14 days later, she was about to attend her first university-level class in advanced theoretical mathematics. The academic committee was quite impressed with your test results, Dr. Wright commented as they approached the mathematics building. Professor Jankowski particularly enjoyed your novel approach to the Riemann hypothesis problem. He said it showed refreshing originality. Melania smiled tentatively. Praise for her mathematical abilities was still foreign territory, uncomfortable yet deeply gratifying. Here we are, Dr. Wright announced, stopping before a heavy wooden door. Room 342. The students have been told to expect you, though I should warn you, mathematicians aren't always the most socially adept bunch. They may stare. I'm used to being stared at, Melania replied quietly. Just for different reasons now. Dr. Wright's expression softened with understanding. Remember, you belong here as much as anyone. Your mind earned you this place. She glanced at her watch. I'll leave you to it. Professor Chen doesn't appreciate interruptions once lecture begins. With a reassuring squeeze of Melania's shoulder, Dr. Wright departed, leaving her alone at the threshold of her new academic journey. Taking a deep breath, Melania pushed open the door. The lecture hall was smaller than she had imagined, just 30 seats arranged in a semicircle, about half of them occupied by students who looked at least 5 years older than her. Conversations halted mid-sentence as heads turned toward the newcomer. Melania froze momentarily, the familiar urge to become invisible washing over her. But then she straightened her shoulders, remembering Mrs. Carter's words, "Your gift is not a burden, it's a power." She selected a seat near the front, ignoring the curious stares, and began unpacking her materials: notebook, pencils, the copy of Chen's Principles of Mathematical Modeling that her mother had managed to find at a second-hand bookstore after learning it was on the course reading list. A young man with rumpled hair and wire-rimmed glasses leaned over from the adjacent seat. "You're her, aren't you?" The high school prodigy Dr. Wright mentioned. Melania nodded cautiously. "I'm Melania." "Marcus," he replied, offering his hand. "Second-year graduate student. We've been wondering what kind of mathematical mind could impress Eleanor Wright. She's notoriously difficult to impress." Before Melania could respond, the door opened again, and Professor Chen entered, a slight, elderly man whose eyes sparkled with keen intelligence behind thick glasses. The room immediately fell silent. "Good afternoon," he began without preamble. Today we will explore the application of stochastic differential equations to quantum field theory. But first, I believe we have a new addition to our class. All eyes turned to Melania again. Professor Chen peered at her over his glasses. Ms. Johnson, I presume. Dr. Wright speaks very highly of your mathematical intuition. We shall see if her assessment is accurate. Without waiting for a response, he turned to the board and began writing equations at a pace that would have left most high school students bewildered. Melania, however, found herself following easily, the mathematical language as clear to her as her native tongue. When Professor Chen paused to ask a question about the derivation he had just presented, Melania found her hand rising almost involuntarily. A lifetime habit of hiding her knowledge battled with her new resolution to embrace her abilities. Professor Chen nodded her way. Ms. Johnson. The transition from the second to third step assumes continuous differentiability, she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. But for certain quantum systems, we might need to consider jump discontinuities at the boundary conditions. A brief silence followed her observation. Professor Chen's expression remained impassive for a moment before his lips curved into a slight smile. Precisely correct, Ms. Johnson. An insight many of my graduate students miss. He turned back to the board. Let us consider, then, the implications of such discontinuities. The lecture continued for another hour, during which Melania contributed twice more, each time receiving that same slight nod of approval from Professor Chen. By the session's end, the initial stares from her classmates had transformed into expressions of respect, and in some cases, outright admiration. As they packed up their materials, Marcus turned to her again. So, the rumors are true. You really are a mathematics phenom. Melania shook her head, embarrassed by the label. I just love the subject. Always have. Well, a few of us meet at the campus coffee shop after class to work on problem sets together, he offered. You're welcome to join, if you want. Fair warning, it usually devolves into arguments about whether mathematics is discovered or invented. The invitation caught her off guard. Casual social acceptance in an academic context was entirely new territory. I'd like that, she managed. Thank you. As the students filed out, Professor Chen beckoned Melania to his desk. Ms. Johnson, a moment. She approached cautiously, still conditioned to expect criticism or dismissal from authority figures. Dr. Wright mentioned the circumstances that brought you to our program, he said, adjusting his glasses. A teacher who attempted to humiliate you with an equation beyond high school level. Melania nodded uncomfortably, not wanting to revisit that memory. I experienced something similar as a young man in Taiwan, Professor Chen continued, surprising her. A mathematics teacher who believed poor students from fishing villages could not possess true mathematical talent. He gave me an impossible problem to solve as punishment for correcting his error. What happened? Melania asked, captivated by this unexpected connection. A rare smile creased Professor Chen's weathered face. I solved it, of course. And 40 years later, I still remember the look on his face. He gathered his lecture notes methodically. Sometimes, Ms. Johnson, the people who try to limit us instead become the catalysts for our greatest achievements. He placed a thin folder on the desk between them. This is information about the International Mathematics Olympiad. The university sponsors participants each year. Based on what I observed today, you should consider applying. Melania accepted the folder with widening eyes. The IMO was the most prestigious mathematics competition for pre-university students in the world. She had read about it, dreamed about it, but never imagined herself as a potential competitor. You think I could qualify? She asked, unable to hide her excitement. I think, Professor Chen replied deliberately, that you have barely begun to discover what you are capable of. He gestured toward the door. Now go join your study group. Mathematics is a collaborative endeavor, despite what many believe. As Melania hurried across campus toward the coffee shop, clutching the IMO folder, her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, meeting with Principal Davis and Mr. Wilson tomorrow at 4. Dr. Wright will be there too. The reminder of Mr. Wilson sent a chill through her momentary euphoria. Despite everything that had happened, the university program, the recognition, the new possibilities opening before her, there remained the unresolved situation with the teacher who had tried to humiliate her. She hesitated outside the coffee shop, watching through the window as Marcus and several other students arranged tables together, making space for her both literally and figuratively in their academic world. Her old instinct urged caution, protection, withdrawal from potential conflict. But Melania was tired of hiding. Whatever tomorrow's meeting held, she would face it as her true self, the self she was just beginning to fully recognize and embrace. With renewed determination, she pushed open the door to join her new peers, ready to argue passionately about whether mathematics was discovered or invented. Discovered, obviously, the patterns existed whether humans perceived them or not. Tomorrow would take care of itself. Today, there was mathematics to explore. Dear friend, remember when someone told you that you weren't good enough? That you didn't belong? This story reminds us that true talent cannot be suppressed forever, and that our differences are not weaknesses, there are superpowers. Everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not who others assume them to be. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content that celebrates courage, resilience, and the power of embracing your authentic self. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that can change perspectives and maybe even change lives. Thank you for watching.